Time now for Media Watch. James Creedon joins us here in the studio. James, the Algeria elections, clearly big online, I imagine. Bouteflika, Abdelaziz Bouteflika, president, 77 years old, seeking a fourth term.
That's right. And it's interesting to look at this through the eyes of the Algerian media. Increasingly, a lot of criticism of the central authorities being heard in the Algerian media, partly because of social media having a growing space in Algerian society. 3G, recently introduced into Algeria about 4 months ago, giving a wider access to telephones and a greater space for people to share those criticisms that they might have publicly. So what we're seeing is an awful lot of images deriding or mocking President Bouteflika, who, of course, was wheeled into the voting centre today in a wheelchair, clearly not in the best of health, but going for that fourth term. So just a quick look at some of those images that are doing the rounds of social media. A lot of the images that I just mentioned of that image of the president in a wheelchair. And Mark, some images perhaps not altogether kind, right? Certainly satirical, certainly derisive, but also making a political point, I suppose, that this is Algeria is being run by a man who is in very poor health. That is the Algerian flag adapted, of course. And here this is somebody also perhaps not the best of taste in terms of humour, but showing that despite his incapacitation, he is winning that race. Despite all of the odds, you would say. Now, interestingly, somebody was pointing out in the newsroom earlier, the president of Guinea, back in 2003, by the name of Lansana Conté, he voted at the time from his car. He was also in bad health, so it was almost like a drive-through voting situation, especially for this gentleman. He's since passed away, but clearly, bad health isn't always something that's getting in the way of people staying on in power. This is one voting centre in Algeria today. Another person sharing this image on social media. 6 candidates, 6 official observers in each bureau. Only the observer for Mr. Bouteflika turned out because the others felt that there was no real point in being there. And also a certain amount of tweets on social media as well, pointing out that through image, for example, that the turnout was quite low depending on where you are in the country. For example, the capital of Kabylie, Tizi Ouzou, 14.56% voter turnout at 6 p.m. this evening, an hour before the closure of voting stations. So really, people just thinking there was no point, Mark.
There's been a lot of unrest there and a lot of dissatisfaction with what they think is going to happen, i.e. Bouteflika given a fourth mandate. James, the media in Algeria, one has the impression that the state isn't that free.
Right.
What's the situation for the media?
All right, well, it really depends on the media that you're talking about. If you're talking about television, for example, you have state television very much touting or repeating the public or the official line. You've had a plethora of private channels that were opened in the last year, including Al Atlas Television. That was shut down, that particular network, last month, Mark, for being too critical of the powers that be. So you can see there clearly not a very free media landscape when it comes to television. You had the director of that channel making a public appeal via YouTube, an SOS as he called it. If you're talking about cartoonists in the print press, you've got this guy Dilem, who frequently publishes extremely critical and extremely derisive images of Bouteflika. You can see here that's going towards a fourth term and looking towards a pretty bleak future is what they're essentially inferring there with a black horizon. Here he's been compared by the same cartoonist to the missing Malaysia Airlines jet, giving off vague signals of life, but essentially missing in action, you could say. So
Again,
you can see
very questionable taste all around that one.
Absolutely,
isn't it?
but I think what's interesting is the fact that stuff does get published. You know, you've also got Kamel Daoud, who gave an interview earlier this week to the left-leaning daily Libération. He's a very vocal critic of the powers that be, but he said sometimes his newspaper, the Quotidien d'Oran, does not publish his material, and when that happens, he just puts it up on Facebook and it gets out that way. Now, just before we move on, Mark, I think it's interesting to point out Mr. Bouteflika has a Facebook page. 445,000 likes for that Facebook page.
How many?
445,000.
Okay.
But did you know that was pretty much not inexistent, but a hell of a lot lower just a few weeks ago? And there was a big spike in terms of his Facebook fans in Turkey. Now, that might raise some eyebrows until you factor in the not the fact, but the probability that those likes were bought. So it wouldn't be altogether likely to have the Algerian president having a lot of fans in Turkey. So there you go, a boosted Facebook presence, Mark.
Okay, very quickly to end.
All right, let's roll these pictures if we have time to see them. This was in Iran yesterday, Mark. It was in the town of Noshar, and what it shows is a man who was being publicly hanged by the name of Balal. Now, what Iranian law allows for is the family of the victim to intervene, and what happened was she gave him a slap in the face and publicly forgave him, and his head was taken out of the noose. So extraordinary images from Iran.
Extraordinary images, you're right, James. Thank you very much indeed. That man then saved by a last-second pardon.
Absolutely, by the mother of the victim.
Good heavens. Okay, James Creedon with Media Watch. Thank you, as ever,
Thanks, Mark.
very much indeed. It's time for us to take a short break. After that, we return with more news. You're watching, of course, live from Paris. Stay with us.